Breaking news, Vice President Kamala Harris is not invisible, and she is booked and busy. Today, Senior Advisor for Public Engagement, Keisha Lance Bottoms, hosted student journalists representing 47 historically Black colleges and universities nationwide to the White House for a press briefing. The students asked Vice President Harris and Bottoms about their issues in their respective communities. As we enter midway into the presidential election season, the VP expert and encyclopedia of Vice President Harris and the host of the Reecie Colbert Show, that is on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126 every Saturday at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, joins us to share previous and upcoming VEEP events for voters to bookmark as the media continues to claim a lack of visibility of Harris. Thank you so much for joining us, VIP panelist, Reecie Colbert.
Thank you, Erica. You're doing a fabulous job hosting.
Oh, thank you, sis. I certainly appreciate you. So I know that you already had something planned, but I really appreciated you coming on today because I really wanted to address this continued reporting about absence of VP Harris and seeing, a cursory look at the White House, especially her readouts, will share with people that she's having and attending and very engaged in events every month throughout the year. I want to just talk about, and then we're going to talk about some other things, that she will be in Columbia, South Carolina this Monday, the 27th of February, and she's going to be talking about affordable broadband network. And so South Carolina is now number one, will go first in the primary presidential election. So Iowa, Nemrata, Marianne, your feelings might be hurt, but that's just what it is. Can you talk to us a little bit about that visit that she has upcoming for Monday?
Well, yeah, I think what her South Carolina visit is going to highlight is that she's actually getting shit done in her portfolio. Broadband access was one of the things that was tasked to her by President Biden, and that was a major part of the infrastructure package that was passed on a bipartisan basis. So not only has the administration already cut the cost of broadband, I don't know if you remember, 1 million families were eligible for lower broadband access last year, several hundred thousand signed up, but they're actually expanding broadband access throughout the state of South Carolina, throughout rural communities, and throughout the country. And so this is one of those areas where Vice President Kamala Harris doesn't get a lot of credit for. But if you remember back in when she was a senator during her campaign, this was one of the areas that she championed. So it's a good thing to see that she's able to go back to these communities and say, these are the accomplishments that we have from the Biden-Harris administration.
Tangible, so to speak. And as a person that is from a rural community, I know that access to broadband, no matter where a person lives, is highly important. So South Carolina, Georgia being those states that are in the top 5 for the presidential primary, and for Vice President Harris, who, as you well know, when it was announced she was going to be on the ticket, $48 million were raised. Some people are still big mad about that, but she has a draw, she has a presence, and she is active. And speaking of activity, she was just in the B.M.B, which, she lives here in D.C., but she was just in Maryland with the newly elected governor, Wes Moore, aboard a historically Black college, Bowie State University, and she was talking about home affordability. Can you walk us through her being there and the importance of her being on an HBCU campus, talking about things? People go to higher education institutions to be able to afford nice homes after they graduate. So could you talk to us about that visit and the outcomes that she had?
Yeah, this is another area where we're seeing the Biden-Harris administration pick up the mantle of Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential platform. One of the areas that she was focused on in her Black agenda, which she did have one, was home ownership, affordability, and closing the wealth gap through home ownership. And so what she was at Bowie State yesterday for was to announce that the Biden-Harris administration is actually lowering the cost of mortgage insurance premiums for FHA loans. And that is something that disproportionately disproportionately impacts Black borrowers, lower income borrowers, because and I include myself in it because I do have an FHA loan, but it was a 203K loan, do disproportionately get FHA loans. And so this is going to save families hundreds of dollars, in some case, even almost $1,000 a year. And that's especially helpful considering the fact that one of the Trump tax scam things that came into effect was phasing out the ability to write off your private mortgage insurance. So those lower premiums that no longer have a tax break on them are going to really make a difference for new homeowner borrowers. I wish it was for all of us and not just the new borrowers, but that is still a really good rollout from the administration. I also like to point out, I covered last year at the White House where Vice President Kamala Harris made an announcement about a home ownership appraisal bias task force that she led up along with Secretary Marsha Fudge, HUD Secretary, that was about tackling the racism in homeownership appraisals that robs Black families of wealth. So this is another tool in the toolkit of trying to close the wealth gap through homeownership for Black families.
Absolutely, and that her presence on a college campus, an institution for higher learners, that there may be some that, as you said, won't be able to benefit, but those that are newly going to be graduating, having decisions to make about home ownership, this will be something excellent for them. So while everyone may not be able to capture those that will be able to be captured in that, that's important, and it's important that she's doing it aboard an HBCU campus. And so these things that you're talking about and sharing with us, Reecie, these sound like kitchen table issues. These sound like things when affordability, that language, those are things that everyday Americans, everyday people are looking out for every day.
Absolutely. I mean, these are just a few of the things that have been in her portfolio. Another thing is medical debt. That's something that she was tackling last year. I was at the White House covering that as well. I wrote an article about it. And the fact that Black people disproportionately have medical debt. And one of the initiatives that Vice President Kamala Harris has talked about for many years is actually credit reporting and how your credit score is calculated. And so there have been a lot of changes to the credit reporting that make it more favorable for consumers, and that helped Black people that were rolled out as part of that medical debt initiative and other initiatives working with the credit agencies to make credit scoring more fair for people like us.
Absolutely. And so these are things, as you said, that do impact our community. So all I'm hearing are checklists. So as people start thinking about what they want, when people start asking, what have you done for me lately? It sounds like VP Harris has definitely been checking those boxes in her office. I'm going to go to the panel for people to ask questions. And I want to start out with our fellow VIP Thursday member, Dr. Greg Carr. Dr. Carr, you have any questions for Reecie around VP Harris's visibility and her activity here throughout the United States?
No, I mean, this is wonderful. And thank you, Reecie, for updating us and for, something you and Roland talked about last week and the week before as well. I think, just this idea of making sure that we know what the vice president is doing and what this administration is doing and how it impacts us in the real world. I'm very excited to see this meeting today with these HBCU journalists, with she and former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. I'm wondering, with all of the information that's out there and all of the distractions and everything that's streaming everywhere all the time, how do we punch through the noise? I mean, I know this is part of it for sure.
Yeah.
But those journalists, those young journalists who will be reporting their student newspapers, and, that's important. But, there's so many distractions out of here. How do we continue to just ramp this up so people do know what Vice President Harris is doing and what this administration is doing?
Thank you, Dr. Carr. It's always good to be with you. And I absolutely agree with you. It was incredibly important to have these students here. And I will note that per the White House Black African-American media director, all of the HBCUs were invited. 47 HBCUs actually sent students, but all of them were invited. And that's something that has been the way that Vice President Kamala Harris has championed, and other HBCU alums like Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms have really championed HBCU students. I've actually been at the White House reporting alongside Howard students who are very excited to be there reporting on homeownership biases or HBCU grants. So this isn't just a one-off type of thing. They're very much welcome very frequently to the White House. But I think what it goes to is one of my particular things that I've always encouraged Vice President Kamala Harris to do is to do more Black media more often. Credibility is something that is a cumulative effect. We have to hear from you. We have to see you more than once. And I think sometimes, I would say her in particular, I think she relies a little bit too much on traditional media, the mainstream media. And we saw, for instance, with her trip to Munich, she was almost entirely erased from some of the coverage around that major speech that she gave at the Munich Security Conference. So the traditional mainstream media is not going to amplify her. They're not going to educate on her record. And that's where I think, for instance, she had a conversation with Steve Harvey a couple of weeks ago. She's inviting these student leaders, these student journalist leaders, to the White House. That's all great, but I think she needs to be a lot more visible when it comes to platforms like this one and other Black platforms like my show, for instance. She can come on it and keep coming back to the well. So people like, I would say Secretary Buttigieg, he gets that. He's out at a lot of these places very frequently. He doesn't do one-off appearances. He goes back over and over again. And I think that's something that she has to do herself.
Absolutely. That is a very good question. And I love the way Reecie is definitely very fair in not only her support, but of a critique. And as Reecie said, Roland Martin Unfiltered is definitely an open door, and so is the Reecie Colbert Show. Dr. Walker, your question for Reecie.
Yeah, Reecie, first of all, you do a fantastic job advocating on behalf of the VP and have from day one. So let's give you a shout out for that. Also, congratulations on your new show.
Thank you.
So my question really relates to, you talk a lot about, and VP Harris has been visible since, being sworn in. But can you talk a little bit about two things? First of all, I think there's a misconception of the understanding of the role of the VP. That's the first point I want to make. And second of all, can you talk about, this is be clear, about a Black woman in terms of some of the outsized expectations that go into her being the first Black woman who's being VP?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you guys recall during the presidential election when it was time to select a VP, Chris Dodd and company came out and said that Vice President Kamala Harris was too ambitious. And so there was this narrative that was already being spun that she was too ambitious and she was going to try to step all over President Biden. And so not only did she have the outsized expectations of being a Black woman, the first woman of any race in that role, but, Black women are judged particularly harshly, but she also had the expectation of really playing a back supporting role for President Biden to not alienate people that are strong, staunch supporters of President Biden. I think he's done a great job of making her a partner. I think if you read White House press releases, they're always careful to credit Vice President Kamala Harris to reference how these particular initiatives relate back to some of the work that she's done as senator or as attorney general. So I think that the White House, at least public facing, does a good job of making her a partner. But the reality is she is a partner and she's a supporting partner to President Biden. He is the star of the show. He's the one who has the nuclear codes, who signs the executive orders, et cetera. And so I think she's done an exceptional job of making it known that she is, deferring to him. Sometimes it's to her detriment. I think she could probably lean in a little bit more in her own power and the fact that she is a historic vice president. But the reality is she's damned if she does, damned if she doesn't. Now, if I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't, I'm going to lean in. I'm not going to shrink back. So I think that that's an area where hopefully we'll see during this presidential campaign, and I expect that they will run again, that she will get a chance to puff up her chest a little bit more and a little bit more safely. But, can I say one more thing, too? I just want to be clear. This is not a matter of invisibility. It's a matter of erasure, and it's a matter of marginalization. Because as Dr. Walker just pointed out, she is visible. We see her side by side with President Biden. We see her travel around the country. She's met with hundreds of groups, and she does plenty of events. However, the media, and a lot of times, even when you come to social media, she's intentionally erased and marginalized. So that's something that is a challenge for her, and that's something she's going to have to overcome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And just very quickly, we have about 45 seconds. Dr. Hill, your question or comment for Reecie?
Yes, thank you so very, very much. What do you think is the greatest legacy that she is building now?
The legacy that she's building is actual substantive policy wins. When you look at what's happening around the Pell Grants, or I should say HBCU funding, HBCU security, climate justice, environmental justice with lead pipes, broadband, she has her hands in a lot of pots. And I think if you are a student of Vice President Kamala Harris like I am, you will see that she is very much influencing very substantial policies that this administration is putting forward and pushing it in a more progressive lane.
Wow. Reecie Colbert, the host of the Reecie Colbert Show on Sirius XM, Urban View Channel 126, every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much for your time today, sis.
Thank you, sis.
Absolutely.